All right, let's take a look at lesson 2, which is laying out a web page. So we've talked about how HTML is built on tags, and tags are codes telling you when to start doing something, how to do it, and then when to stop. Well, when planning a web page, you need to consider, like, later on, what are you going to want that page to look like? And we would think about putting the page into sections. Okay, now this won't matter in the early chapters, but we need to start planning ahead. And you're going to be doing a project throughout this entire class where you're creating a resume. So we're going to be adding those sections in early on. So I want to go ahead and at least draw attention to them. But if you look at this picture, a lot of times you're going to see web pages that are sort of set up like this. If you look at my code.org website, here at the top, this is a header area. And then there's something over here on this side. So you might consider that an aside. And then if there's other things, that might be the main area of the page. And then a lot of times there's a footer or something at the bottom. So when you're setting up your page, you want to think of those as boxes. And how are we putting boxes either inside other boxes or stacking them on top of each other? We call those boxes semantic layout tags. And those semantic layout tags, there are a bunch to choose from. The very common ones are things like main and header and footer, but they don't really do anything. Like if I put footer in here, you wouldn't see anything look any different. For example, if I come in here and I say, okay, I'm just going to add a footer in here, and inside my footer, I'm going to put a paragraph that says copyright, if I can spell, copyright 2024, and turn off the paragraph and turn off the footer. Okay, well, it just looks like I added a paragraph. And that's true because the footer doesn't automatically go at the bottom of the page, and the footer doesn't automatically make a paragraph, and the footer doesn't automatically do anything. It's just down there. So whatever you put in the footer is what you're putting in the box. So I'm putting a paragraph in my footer box. Okay, I could put this heading in a header box. So I could say, all right, let's have a header box, and we're going to put this heading in the header box, right? And then maybe I've got a main box, and in my main box, I'm going to have my other stuff. Okay. And if you watched video 1, I don't have my H2s turned to color. So I'm just going to tell it to make all of these things white. I'm going to get rid of all of this, and I'm just going to move this up here so that everything is white. Okay, so I've got my body background is black, and actually the proper way to do this is background color, and then my color is white, which is my font. Okay, so we've got this set up, but what's cool about this is once we have them in their own little boxes, we can style those boxes. Again, it's not a this chapter thing. I'm going to show you anyway, but I can say I want my header box, and we'll learn how to do all this later on. I'm just going to change background colors. I want my header box to have a red background color, and I want my footer box to have a red background color. And we can do that really simply because these are in their own boxes. And then if I add extra stuff in there, that stuff is also going to stay in that area. So like my header box, if I decide I need to have another thing in it, my name or whatever, then I can add that inside that box, and it's all together in there. So that's kind of the use of these semantic section elements. Okay, now we're going to get into more in-depth coding here in this chapter because I'm going to introduce you to a bunch of new tags. So be sure you're making notes on these tags. Now, some of these tags I've mentioned already in class, so you're probably already familiar with them, but just be sure you have them in your notes. H1 is how we put in headings, and headings are automatically bold. They are not automatically bigger. There are 6 sizes of headings, and an H1 is the largest, but an H6 is the smallest. So if I were to change this by whatever part line to an H6, you would see it's really small. It's smaller than a paragraph would be because this copyright is a paragraph size. Okay, so those are H1s. Paragraphs we've talked about. Paragraphs, of course, are just simply words. So in my main section, I could type in a paragraph over here. So I'm just going to grab a hold of this information and use it as my paragraph just to make this faster. So here's my paragraph, and I'll turn it off. And then there's my one paragraph, right? because I only put in one P tag, it's one paragraph, even though it might look like two paragraphs here. If I want this to be two paragraphs, I would have to turn that off and then turn another one on, and then we would have two paragraphs. So that's how a paragraph looks. Now there's also, and this is a new one, block quote. A block quote is like a paragraph. Matter of fact, it replaces a paragraph. So if I type in my block quote, and it does have pairs, and then let's say I just paste in that stuff that I did before. Look at the difference here. So a block quote is just like a paragraph, but it has an indentation on the left and an indentation on the right. Okay, so it's just like a paragraph, it's just indented on both sides. That's a block quote. All right. Okay, HRs, and HR is just a horizontal line. It stands for horizontal rule, and it is an empty element. So if I put an HR between this paragraph and this block quote, it's just going to put it in there. I can stack all these things on top of each other. Headings on paragraphs, on block quotes, on HRs. All of those are what we call block elements. They all sit on top of each other with a gap in between each one, or padding around each one. A couple of other tags on this unit. If I come back in here and put in another heading, and then I'm going to put Jackson High School. And if I wanted that to be on 3 lines the way it looks on my screen, notice it doesn't look like that on this document. Well, that's because after the word Jackson, I need to tell it to break to another line. So if I put that BR in there, then it's going to break to the next line. Same thing with high. If I put the BR in there, then it's going to break to the next line. So a BR is a line break, which simply goes to the next line, but it does not set that text apart like it does when you start a new paragraph. Okay. All right. The last couple in here are things we have talked about. Emphasis and strong. EM is italics. So if I put that around the word every, EM, it's going to make the word every in italic. There is technically one called I, but I'm told you're not really supposed to use I, because I just simply means the word is slanted for no reason. Like you're just doing it to be pretty. And if you're emphasizing the word, you should use an EM, because that indicates it's being emphasized for a reason. Same thing with bold and strong. There's a B tag for bold, but a strong tag indicates that this word is important. So they suggest using strong as your important word rather than just a B tag, because a B would mean an arbitrary bold word. I just bolded it because I felt like it because it looked nice. That would be bold. Strong is, this has strong meaning. It's an important word. It's a vocabulary word. It's, you must do this thing. Those are strong because we need them to be important. The last two on here is pre and div. Pre is what's called pre-formatted text. Pre-formatted text is kind of like its own little paragraph of stuff that looks, I don't know, like a typewriter wrote it maybe. Okay, and however you enter and however you space, it will actually accept it inside the pre tag. So if I hit enter after these, notice it's going down to the next line. Here is a pre-formatted text line. I didn't put BRs in. It just went down to the next line. That's how that works. And if I were to spacebar a bunch of times, it's going to actually count the space bars. Now, one thing you might notice about pre-formatted text, it's in a different font. So it actually does not match the rest of the font on the page. It's kind of used for codes. Like if you were going to say, you know, type in the code, you know, strong to do something, and you wanted to be able, and I can't type the word strong in here, but like if you were saying, you know, type this word or whatever, you might want it to be in a different font, right? Anyway, that's pre-formatted text. The last one on here is called a div. A div is simply a division on the page. If you don't have a name for something, like for instance, this main, I could technically make something and give it a name. So I could give it a name called like bar, and I would put div spacebar ID equals bar. We will get into divs later on, so don't really worry about that for now. All right, and then another mention that HTML does not interpret enters or space bars except in this pre-formatted text. So only if I'm in pre-formatted text can I do all the enters and space barring I want. If I click after the word element here and enter a bunch of times, it never moves. If I space bar a bunch of times, it never moves. So you can space or enter however you want in your HTML coding document, and that's totally up to you. All right, the next page is getting into nesting tags. Nesting tags is closing tags in the proper order. You have to nest tags correctly. So here is a document that's set up correctly. And if I take my pencil here and I go to fill this in and I connect all the matching pairs, they will never cross. So HTML, head, title, body, heading, paragraph. Notice none of these lines ever cross. That's how you know it's properly nested. But, if you type something like, EM, so we got a paragraph and an EM and then a word, and then we go to turn it off. If we turn off the paragraph first, that's wrong. Oh, I can't go down there. Because if we connect the P to the P, like so, then we connect the EM to the EM, see they cross. And then we have a problem here. Houston, we have a problem, okay? So they cannot cross. You have to make sure that you close them in the reverse order that you open them, and that you use elements like bold and emphasis and that sort of thing inside of those block elements. So use them inside of the paragraph or inside of the headings, not outside of the paragraph or outside of the heading. And then lastly, we talked about block elements a little bit already, but things that you can stack on top of each other are block elements. And there's a whole list of them on this page at 13 in your book. Inline elements don't start a new line, and those just go on the page. So when we put in bold or we put in italics, this is an inline element. It's used inside of a block element. So what block element is my strong used in right now? A paragraph, right? If I were to come up here and use an EM inside of this heading, I can do that because an EM is an inline element, so it's used inside of a block. What block is it in? It's in my H1 block. So that's how that works. Block elements stack. Block elements have gaps between them, generally speaking. And inline elements, you just use wherever you need to use them inside of a block. Okay? All right, that is essentially it for lesson 2. Now you're going to continue working through lesson 2, doing the project for the Batman project. So be sure that you've started that you've done lesson 1 and then 2A and 2B that go with this lesson. All right, good luck.